Hi, welcome to Chad Silversmithing. First, thanks for visiting my channel. I really appreciate you coming. If you wouldn't mind, it really helps the algorithm find my channel if you'd make sure to hit the like button before you leave. So check out the video, don't forget to hit the like button, and maybe consider subscribing. There's lots of good content here. Today's project, I thought it would be fun to make. Been visualizing because I've got some rounded square stones or rounded rectangular stones that are really pretty, and so I thought I'd make a cool retro kind of bracelet out of it. What I drew up kind of reminds me of the 70s, and since I'm going to use a piece of red onyx, it's got kind of that parallel banding that's kind of pretty, and it reminds me of the 70s too for some reason. Before we get started, I wanted to thank some people. I have two new patrons. I have Leslie D. and Pat R. Thank you so much for signing up for my Patreon. I appreciate your support, and I will do my best to provide you interesting content over there. So I offer things like exclusive tutorials for them, an occasional live stream event, ad-free content over there, as well as some extras here and there. It's a nice community full of really creative people, and we're sharing ideas and coming up with solutions to problems. It's a nice place to join. You might consider checking it out. If you're interested in that, hit the video description down below. There's a link to the Patreon. There's also a link to my website where you can buy jewelry. If you just feel like giving me a tip for appreciating my content here, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link, and there's also a merch store, believe it or not, with some cool stuff. So check those out if you're interested. But with that being said, I think it's time to get started on our project. So let me show you a drawing of what I had in mind here. First, this was the original stone I was going to use. It's kind of a pretty onyx, some browns and grays, and a little bit of translucent areas. The initial design I drew up was really big, and so I decided to go a little bit smaller and use a Sardonyx or a red onyx. And so let me show you what I drew up here. Oops, too far. Here it is. So this was my initial idea, something like this. I guess I could have gone that way. Maybe that'll look better, I don't know. But this was Mongo. This is about a 7-inch bracelet, which is kind of big. I decided to go more with a 6-inch and using this guy. So, like that. And then I did kind of different patterns on this one. The materials I'm going to use for the bezel, I'll use 3/16 inch fine silver bezel strip. This is 26 gauge, which is a little on the thicker side, so I like that. For the outer border here, I have some 8 gauge half round wire, and the challenge on this is going to be getting nice rounded corners around here like this, because we're going to be bending it in a way that it doesn't want to bend really. For these designs in the middle here, I'm going to be using some 14 gauge round sterling wire, and in order to, since this has a pretty back and I might as well make it open backed, I'm going to use on the inside of the bezel, I'm going to use a little bit of 14 gauge square wire to create a platform for that to sit on it, so it has a little step. And I think that is pretty much all we're going to need. So first thing, let's make the bezel, I think. I had really good response on the last couple of cuff bracelets that I made. What do we call it? Frank Lloyd Wright one. If you want, I'll put a link up there. You can check that one out. That was kind of a fun one. And I did, I think it was azurite malachite in matrix, kind of round stone, and more of a simple traditional kind of cuff bracelet, and I'll put a link up there for that one too if you'd like. Oops, I guess I can use this one here. I really like the red onyx. It's pretty colored. Some people probably are not partial to these earth tones, but I like them. I always leave just a little skosh extra on this, although I don't have it super tight up against there, so I'm not going to leave a lot extra because I'm just going to file a little bit off of there. Okay. If you're new to this, I use fine silver for the bezel and sterling silver for everything else. The bezel being holding the stone in, it's nice to have it a little bit more malleable when you go to set the stone. And fine silver is softer than sterling silver. A surprising number of people seem to think that sterling silver means pure silver, and it's not. It's 92.5% silver and 7.5% copper is what makes sterling silver. They add the copper into it in order to make it a little bit harder because fine silver scratches so easily. If you make stuff out of fine silver, it doesn't hold a polish for very long because it gets scratched up. The little extra copper in there makes it just a skosh harder. Not sure where I picked up the term skosh. Somebody in one of my classes, I think, at one point. Doing this all in frame here. Didn't check earlier. By the last video I did, I got to the end and I was showing the product of the video at the end, and I looked up and I'd just been polishing, and I wear a particulate mask when I do that, and it messes up my hair sometimes. And so I came back and I started filming the video without really looking at myself too much, and I looked up at the camera like this, and my hair was just everywhere. It was pretty funny. So I left it in because it was a oppressive bad hair. Okay, so I use a hard silver sheet solder for just about everything. Very rarely use anything else. Unless there's a real sketchy joint like a hinge or something. The other thing I do that some people don't is I use a spray-on flux. It's called My-T-Flux. It's from Rio Grande. Rio Grande, I should say. Okay, so let's get this shaped a little bit. Find, rather than bending things much, I use the pliers to pinch out corners that I might have made. They're too sharp. For me, it's easiest to solder the bezel closed when it's kind of in an angular shape, so I get the two ends straight together like that. You don't have to do it that way. Some people do it other ways. But I'm not doing a lot of bending. I'm doing a lot of squeezing here with the pliers, just gentle squeezing. Strategic squeezing, so to speak. One of the things when you're making a cuff bracelet, they're a little bit bigger and more massive. And so if you're using a small torch like a butane, one of those little butane torches, or even Sometimes people use these propane kind of cylinders with a little torch head on them, and those are fine for a lot of things, but they really don't have the oomph when you start to get a real massive piece of silver. And you know, it's important to get the entire thing up to temperature when you solder stuff, and it's hard to get a big piece of jewelry up to temperature with those little torches. So this is not a difficult project, I don't think, but you need a hot enough torch to do it. Alright, so normally I'd be putting a back on this, but today we're going to put a little lip on the inside instead of that, so we have an open back. So I'm going to start by snipping off this little bevel end here. I'm going to file it. And I need a piece that's going to fit all the way around the inside of here, so I'm going to start by straightening the square wire out. Square wire will, if you go to bend square wire, it tries to turn diagonal on you because it's trying to find an easier way to twist it or to bend than that. So starting off with it straight will help me, I think, get the size right. So I could say, well, that's one side, right? So if I just keep doing that 4 times-ish and then add a little extra, I'll definitely have a big enough piece. Right? So do that, add about that much extra. Turn it off. And then we don't have to deal with the big floppy roll of silver. So now I'm just going to spend a little time getting this really straight in both dimensions. So you get it straight in one dimension, then turn it like this, and it's not going to be straight in that dimension. So pretty close. We're going to have to make this into the shape of this bezel, but it's tempting for a lot of times for people to put the end in a corner, but it's really hard to get the corners consistent if you do that. So I usually put the end in the middle of one of these sides when I start bending it. So, so I'm going to say, maybe, you know, the bend will start right about there. So I'll grab it there, and then we'll try and do that. Remember what I said though, when you're trying to bend square wire, it tries to twist on you because when I'm bending it towards me like this, it's trying to compress this side of it and stretch this side of it, and that's really hard for it to do. So it tries to turn sideways on you. So you got to kind of correct that as you go. Because if you don't correct it, by the time you get all the way around, it's going to be laying completely on its side. That's a little closer now. These are rounded squares, so I'm going to be kind of making it like that, kind of. It looks like the bend on this one starts about right there. Too far in, see? We're going to move the bend a little bit outwards. There. That's pretty good. I got pretty lucky on that one. That gives us a pretty accurate measurement there. You can see it's tight in there all the way around, and it overlaps there pretty much. So probably just make a little mark right here. I'm going to leave a little extra in order to make sure it gets in there tight. I'm not going to cut it right on that line. I'm going to cut it a little beyond where it is. And I'm going to file it flat and then see how close we are. Because if you cut it right at the line and then file it a little bit, it might be too small and then you have a gap in there. Nobody wants an embarrassing gap in there on their ledge. People would talk. Say, I really love Chad's jewelry, but he's got this embarrassing gap underneath his stones. I usually don't line it up on the same side as the previous solder joint and the bezel, but push it all the way to the bottom of this thing. And then I'm going to cut some relatively big pieces of solder to add to these here. And we're going to set this thing right on top of the solder so that it sucks it right up into the juncture between the bezel and the platform we're creating here. I usually keep a tool in my hand in case this is riding up above any of these pieces of solder, so that I can put a little downward pressure to make sure it's in contact with the solder when it starts to flow. If you ever have one sitting there that doesn't seem to want to go up into the thing, it's probably because it's not quite in contact. There we go. Once you do have that seam, you want to make sure it runs all the way around. If you don't quite get it hot enough, it won't. Or if you have too much of a gap. I think I got it pretty much all the way around. I can always go back and add some more if it didn't quite, get all the way around there. Alright, nice clean bottom on there. Everybody wants a nice clean bottom, I suppose. Alright, so you're trying to bend this stuff sideways. So again, just like before, I'm not going to put the corner right here. I'll start it in the middle of a side somewhere before I make the bend. And then I'll base the further bends on where it is in relation to the first bend I made. So, but first I'm going to get this a little flatter and just spend a little time getting it to lay nice on the table and be straight. And again, the way I measured this one was I just took it's 160 millimeters either side, and it was like 36 millimeters this way, so I just added it all together and added a little bit extra in order to compensate for any errors or any kind of stretching that's going on in the corners that's going to affect the actual size of the piece you need. So there should be a little bit too much here, hopefully. A little bit too much is better than a little bit not enough. Some of this now on this side, I'm going to try and get it to be relatively straight. Just kind of holding it down and using leverage to push out any kind of bends that are not the way I want them. This is trying to twist on me a little bit too. Okay. So like I said, it's about 6 inches long, so if I go about 3 inches down here. And see, I'm going to just grab it and hold it. So I'm trying to keep it flat on the table while I'm doing this. And so it didn't keep it completely flat. It's got a slight angle this way. So I'm going to go back, just like on the square wire. It's trying to find an easier way to bend. And so we're going to correct that manually. We're going to try and get that corner to be a nice corner. That's looking a little more angular. Looks pretty good. So now I think let's make a mark here. That's right there. pretty darn close. So I can fine tune the corners after I get this soldered together. This is going to be a pretty visible solder joint, so you want to take the time to get it really good. We don't have a visible line there, so. This is a big piece of metal we have now, so it's going to take a little bit of heat to get it up to soldering temperature. Alright, so our next step is finding the center of this thing, or at least pretty close. So now it's tied up against there. Okay, I'm going to try and get this soldered in so it doesn't go the entire length, and it probably won't because it's not in contact with the entire length, so, but keep it in the center so that I have a little play in blending it. Let's make sure it's flush with the bottom there. Okay, I'm going to get like a 14 gauge round wire here. We need some more, but I'm going to start with a piece so it's not so, just like before, cumbersome. Let's get this guy pretty straight. One of the things that I may do, I'm going to see how this one works out, but most times I try not to solder anything. If I'm soldering a bezel between two things like this, any of the decorations I'm making, I usually don't solder to the bezel, because when you go to round it out, it's going to put some pressure on this as you round the band out, and it's going to stretch it and distort it. And so I probably will leave these not soldered to this part here. Let's just file the end flat here and start making shapes. These need to be kind of bulgy squares or rectangles because the stone has kind of bulged out sides on it a little bit. I'm trying to kind of mirror that stone there. It's pretty close. probably what I'll do is I'll solder this one together. And since I have to do it, looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different rings. Probably won't make you watch me make all of them. I'll just kind of show you how I make one, and then I'll do the rest off camera to save you video viewing time. Because it's basically the same thing over and over again. I think for this one. What'll get interesting is where we need to put them in there and cut some of them so they overlap. That's where it'll get more fun. So I'm just going to pick up a little piece here. There you go. Solder it. Cool it off, and I'll probably shape it a little bit too to make sure it's symmetrical. So then I'm just going to kind of work my way through the whole thing here. But yep, I'm just going to go ahead and make a whole bunch of these rectangles, and then I'll come back and we'll start putting them together. So I think I finished making my little rounded squares. I may need to do a little more shaping on some of them, but I think they're pretty close. So my next step, I think, is going to be to gradually start putting these in here. And so I'm going to do it one at a time, probably. Let's set these guys over here for now. I think I'm going to start with this one here. The solder joint on this, where I soldered it together, is actually right there, so I can use that to solder it to the side of this thing here. But do you remember I said I probably don't want to solder it right up against that? So I'm going to try not to solder that to the side there, so that when I bend the bracelet, it allows me some movement. So. One down, 9 to go. So do I cut this in half or do I cut that little piece out of there? It doesn't really matter, I don't think. Make sure you see what I'm showing you there. So I think it'll be easier the way it is to measure if I cut this here. I'm using these Zuron cutters like this. They cut flat on this side, and so not perfectly flat, but I'll have to file less. So if I snip it that way so that the flat side's facing this side here, and then again the flat side's right here, so I'm going to face this side. I'm just going to kind of file those flat. You could probably make 20 of these that were similar but not exactly the same. Different stones and slightly different patterns. I think that would be fun. I think I got a solder joint on this side, so I can put him right up against there. I think to prevent this video from getting too long, I'm going to go ahead and do the other part off camera, and then I'll come back and we'll finish it up. So I'll be back shortly. So here's my little polished piece. Make sure I get rid of most of the residue there of the polishing compound. And file this down to the appropriate level for setting it. So just a tiny bit of the bezel shows up over the stone. And most people use bezel pushers and burnishing tools, but I generally just use my needle nose pliers here. It's got a nice flat, smooth area there to start with. I'm just going to push it straight in. Now I'm going to do the burnishing stage, which is using this rounded outer part of the needle nose plier. That's where you're just kind of rubbing that top edge to really press it down over the top of the stone there. We'll still probably have to do a little bit of final cleanup with the rotary tool on the top of this bezel here to make sure it's smooth. A lot of people use a bracelet mandrel, and you can use those. It looks great. But if you don't have one of those, you might have an aluminum baseball bat at home. You can use that as well. But really, when you're using a bracelet mandrel, you're just choosing the curves that you want, not necessarily wrapping it straight around the thing, you know. If I want this to curve around a little bit more, take advantage of that part of the mandrel to get that curve that you're looking for. You see why I separated this up here, so that it won't pull on that bezel as it gets shaped. It pulls apart a lot of ways. Places where it's soldered to the side here may be a little stiffer as far as getting them smoothed out to a nice shape. We're starting to get pretty close here, I think. Of course, these are meant to be shaped a little bit to the individual's wrist, so you can do that once someone is in the process of buying it from you. But we got the general idea here. I said I'll probably do just a little bit more cleaning up, and then I'll get some better pictures of it for the end. Right, well, that was the kind of retro modern bracelet with the rounded square stone. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you leave, and then check out some other videos here. I have over 160 videos. I've been busy putting up lots of content. I put 3 different videos a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday generally. There's tons of content here. I've got over 160 videos, content that fits all different levels, whether you're a beginner who's just learning the basics, or whether you're an advanced person just looking for ideas. It's lots of great stuff here, so check it out. And then subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you get updates on what's coming up. All right, well, thank you again for watching. I appreciate you taking the time. Feel free to leave comments. Happy silversmithing. Take care.